Here we go.
All right. So firstly, Silka, thank you so much for the opportunity. We connected out of the blue, and it's been a long time in the works. So great to have been talking all these months. I think it's been nearly 4 or 5 months, I think, if not longer. Um, and Dan, like you said, we've been connected for the longest time, and I wasn't really even sure whether you were in Australia or New Zealand, but good to finally make that connection. Um, and thank you all to all of you who already joined, and I hope that you find value in the conversation today. So let's get started. We are, unfortunately, I may have too many slides, so I'm going to try and see as much as I can cover in today's session. And then, if there is some stuff left over, hopefully I will share my slides. So hopefully those will be of value to you. So the agenda for the talk that I have set out is to really define what is the product management context. Depending on the kind of company that you're working for, it might mean slightly different things for different people and the kind of environment that you're in. And then what are some of the key challenges for product managers? Having been in the product management profession myself for the longest time, I have a lot of empathy for the profession. I think it's one of the most challenging things that you do for a variety of reasons, both the way that organizations are structured and the way that product organizations are driven by engineering or sales, typically when they're startups. And so product management and marketing are typically functions that have to have a lot of resilience to really sort of hang in there. So I have a lot of empathy for product managers, uh, other roles that you might go by, etc. Um, and then I'm going to talk about, of course, how Kanban really helps the product management function really manage their function effectively. So what are some of the tools that Kanban provides to product managers to really be more effective in terms of managing the product roadmap or the backlog or what have you, and really hopefully be more effective at your work. This is something that has come out of my personal learning as well as what we see in our own company all the time. And so hopefully this is of value to you. And sort of finally, I'll kind of summarize with benefits as well as some of the challenges that still sort of persist in spite of all the benefits of Kanban. So just a little bit about me. Like Silka said, I'm a co-founder at Digite, which is a product company. We've been around for nearly 20 years. And Swift Kanban is our Kanban tool, which has been around for nearly 10 years now. And I started off being the product manager for Swift Kanban. I have shifted to other roles, but I continue to be involved with Swift Kanban and the Kanban community, thanks to whom I've had the honor and the sort of privilege to be a Kanban trainer, a coach, consultant, etc., and really work very closely with our customers to help them implement or further their implementation of Kanban through the use of tooling that Swift Kanban provides. A little bit more about myself. I'm going to quickly skip past some of these things here. Just glimpses of the life in the Bay Area, my fondness for tea, good quality tea, and food in general. My love for singing, as well as I ride the motorbike every time I get a chance, and if my wife would let me. Um, like I said, I have a lot of empathy for the product management function. My own journey has been in a mix of consulting companies as well as now been in the product company for the last 20 years. And in that journey, I have predominantly served the role of what might be called a analyst of sorts, a business analyst or a system analyst or a functional analyst, etc., or a project manager, and then of course in the product management function. So my role has really been to manage requirements, manage product backlogs, manage feature requirements, etc., in a variety of different functions. So those are sort of the different roles that I've played. So if you are a product manager, the question is, are you a product manager? So depending on the organization that you're part of, you would probably have one of these functions or titles or roles. And if you are, then hopefully you will find this talk useful. So what is the challenge of the product management function and in general of software development, right? It is the challenge of what used to be called the iron triangle. So in spite of the move to agile, and clearly uh, teams and organizations have made the transition to agile fairly successfully, but in spite of all of the sort of uh, uh, so let's say the structures and the artifacts and the processes of agile, there is a certain level of the organization above which any project still gets treated pretty much the same way as it would in a legacy waterfall model, where you are dealing with fixed scope, fixed schedule, fixed cost type of challenges, where you've got to manage within this type of a constraint. In a product organization such as ours in Digite, we may not have a external sort of constraint like a contract, but we still, of course, work with fixed schedule in the sense that we obviously have a challenge of bringing out new features, new functionality, new things in our products, depending on a market event, depending on customer requirements, depending on just the industry, developments. So we certainly have schedule challenges that we need to meet ourselves. Although the challenge on the other side is that the scope is open, and the challenge for product managers in product companies is, in particular, is to truly decide what to build, right? And that's the challenge of having an open scope where you got to build the right product at the right time. But I love Dilbert, and as you can see in my earliest slide as well, brings out some amazing challenges of the software and project world. Um, so, who are the key stakeholders for product managers? So let's start from there. Who are the sort of people that the product management people are typically answerable to, and between whom they have to play the balancing act? So on the left-hand side, it's typically the various types of stakeholders that you might expect in these different types of organizations. So they might be sales teams, sales people, or their prospective customers who are asking for certain features, and they promise a bag of money if only you had a certain set of features in your product. So sales, especially in startups like Digite, they place an enormous amount of pressure on product management to build certain features, whether those features are aligned or not to the product roadmap. Then, of course, you have the typical roadmap sort of dependencies like competition and technology, which is understandable. You also have management and leadership to whom you're answerable, not so much for specific functions and features, but certainly in terms of what is the overall, um, you know, uh, um, readiness of the roadmap in order to be able to compete with the rest of the competition. And then, of course, there are actual customers. You have paying customers who are already using a product, and you want them to be happy and delighted, and therefore they are making requests directly or through functions such as support and services. So you have all of these people who try and influence your prioritization of work. And then, of course, on the other side, you have this large delivery organization that you're responsible to or answerable to, uh, and whose work really largely depends on the kind of work that you do. And so, therefore, the challenge of the product management person is really to be able to play a good balancing role between these two sides of the coin. On the left hand side, from the customers or the management and leadership, these are the typical kinds of questions that product managers are supposed to answer. When can we get something? By when will it be done? Why is it taking so long? What's holding us up? What should we be working on now in a product company? That becomes really, really critical, that you define very well and on the right time what are the right things that you want to work on. Because unlike a customer environment or a business user environment in a corporate IT or uh, IT services company, where there is a specific customer that's asking for something very specific. So therefore, the challenge of what to do is not so hard. It is then taking that what to do into doable things that your development team can do. So these are some of the questions that the product manager is responsible for. And then, in addition, if it's customer, they're also asking for, can we get something new? In fact, just before I started this call, I was responding to an email chain within Digite for one of our largest customers asking for a set of things which are a bit of an anathema to Kanban principles, but nevertheless, these are things that we need to consider and sort of give back sort of nuanced or measured answers in terms of whether we can do something like that or not. On the other side, the dev and engineering perspective, delivery team perspective, it is, of course, to ensure that they have the right set of features at the right time with the right level of detail. And so their questions are around are these really the right things to be working on? Do we have the right level of detail? Can we get visibility into what's coming, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, etc.? Because they obviously have their own planning challenges that they need to manage. So these are the questions that the product manager is facing. And on the other side of the coin, the product manager has these kinds of questions for their stakeholders as to, hey, do we really need to build something like this that you're asking me to build? It is not aligned to our roadmap. It is not really in line with our overall, market position. Um, we get challenged all the time in terms of building things that we don't want to build. And how skillfully can we do it? How well can we do it is a continuous challenge that we face. And on the other hand, to the delivery side, our challenge is more about planning and making sure that we understand what can be done by when, based on the constraints that the delivery team has. So these are some of the things that the questions that product managers have. And then, of course, the previous slide covered the question that product managers get posed. And all of these are sort of the life of the product manager. So uh, whether you are a product manager, whether you're a business analyst working on a multiple software projects or application development projects in a corporate IT environment, or whether you are in the IT services function where you're dealing with one or more customers, that's sort of the life um, that you live. Um, and hopefully, this talk will resonate with all of you if you are in one of these roles. Now, my learning over the last 10 years has been that Kanban is really great at answering these questions. So, in a way, 10 years ago or 11 years ago, when I met with David Anderson, and we began the Kanban journey, I think it was sort of a restart for many of us in the organization. And there are probably 3 or 4 of us in the company uh, who are really strong believers of Kanban, and we really believe that that's sort of the solution to a lot of our challenges in the IT or the high tech world. Of course, the risk of that is that every time there is a new problem that comes along, we try and look at Kanban as the solution for it. And so that's always a risk that you might overdo that. But at least in the context of what we're talking about, I believe that um, Kanban truly helps. So these are the 5 ways in which I believe Kanban really helps. And I'm going to drill down into each of them. So firstly, it visualizes the challenges or visualizes the product management process and the challenges of that process very well. Secondly, it provides explicit policies for greater collaboration. So Kanban, if you're familiar with the Kanban method and the foundation principles and the core practices, you know that it emphasizes a lot about making policies explicit. And the very act of making that happen makes it easy for collaboration across these 3 different buckets of people that I showed, from the stakeholders and customers on the left-hand side, the product management in the middle, and the delivery deployment people on the right-hand side. It makes for greater collaboration across these 3. Thirdly, it makes, obviously, Kanban is very data-driven, as most of you who are already using Kanban would know. Uh, Kanban systems and Kanban tools, as a result of that, automatically collect some very key data for the work that you do. And as a result, make it very easy for you to have these data-driven discussions that sort of take away the emotion and help you, help you further along your cause in whatever you're doing in terms of making a product more successful. And we'll see how some of that happens. Fourth, it of course helps you understand and plan your demand and capacity. So at an organizational level or at a team level, you really get a good picture of what your overall capacity is to do work, what's your nature of the demand, and you're able to therefore balance it better. And of course, finally, it gives you a full or a holistic picture, all of which again then helps you and the entire organization get sort of better at delivering products. All right, so let's drill down into each of these. And I'm kind of rushing a little bit, but if you have a question, please feel free to stop me and ask at any time. Or if you have a comment to make based on your own experience, I'm happy to pause and answer, because I think it's more useful to make it interactive. But nevertheless, I'm going to try and keep it going so that we sort of have enough time at the end for some questions. So firstly, visualizing the product management process. It's been, like I said, it's been nearly 20 years since I've been running Digitech. We started in 2002, so this is the 19th year. Just a few weeks back, just maybe a couple of weeks back, actually, one of my earliest contemporaries in Digitech, who used to head engineering at one time, as we were in the middle of a strategy meeting, he messages me on the side and says, Mahesh, I finally get how difficult it is for product management to do their work. And he was talking about all of the variety of factors that impact the way that product management and leadership in general, but certainly product management has to make decisions and recommendations. And he was finally getting it. So I was happy to hear that comment from him, because he and I, fought tooth and nail in the early days of Digita in terms of trying to build what I thought was the right thing to build, when I didn't have all the information that I needed to have in order to know whether it was right or wrong. So one of the pet peeves that I have about Agile in general, whether it's Agile, Scrum, or Kanban, etc., is that you see all these great pictures where you see the sort of definition of what Scrum or Kanban is. And you'll notice something very nice about each of these pictures. And these are these little icons that depict the backlog. It is always nicely sort of laid out, it's nicely structured, and nobody questions how the backlog came about, right? And the focus is entirely on the dev and the delivery side. And how do you run the iterations and so forth. In most of the early versions of Kanban boards that I've seen, and I'm sorry, so the storyboard kind of tells the same story. There is a to-do, doing, and done, where the user stories are already kind of there, and you work on them. Same thing with the Kanban board, where you have a backlog, and then the rest of the focus is on the doing part of it, right? So I don't know if you've noticed this or if you've felt the need for commenting on it, but the fact that the user stories are there waiting for for the teams to take up and build, how did that happen? Nobody kind of questions that. And so that's sort of the big thing that probably in about 2014 is when I started to talk about some of this in conferences and in our internal discussions, that how do we actually get to that groom backlog? And we also learned the hard way. So I'll as part of this presentation, I'll talk a little bit about how we implemented Kanban as we started to build our Swift Kanban product. And how we also learned the hard way, because we didn't know any better either, right? In 2011 or so, when we started our Kanban journey, that was really our first foray into Agile and Kanban and whatever other flavor you want to think about in terms of Agile. Till then, we were sort of an iterative, waterfallish company. We would have maybe 2 or 3 releases, major releases in a year, and all the challenges of planning and delivering big releases were ours. So when we started with Kanban, as you can imagine, our board also reflected the ready, doing, done kind of a design, right? So you see the ready queue, you see the dev and the validation testing queue, and then the approve. This was really our actual first board design. We didn't know any better. And then very quickly we realized, obviously, from there that it really didn't highlight some of the work that the product management team was doing. So very quickly we moved out to our version 2 of the board, which was in 2011-12 timeframe, where we gave a little bit of more attention to planning and scoping. So you can see that we had a planning board, which is a swim lane above our dev lane. And unfortunately, the whole lane is not visualized here. But you can see that we had some estimation steps, we had some spec development, there were some review steps beyond that. And then finally, once the user stories were sort of finalized, then they would move on to the next swim lane in the board, which was the dev lane. I think I might, I'm sorry, unfortunately, I don't have that. Version 3 was when we said, okay, this didn't really do justice to the kind of work that we were doing. And as a product company, we were trying to make sure that we were really competitive in the market. We wanted to make sure that we were building things that were considered table stakes, things that were sort of considered a given, versus things that would cause a wow, were considered to be innovation, really differentiators and so forth. So we defined a Kanban board next with a different design, different layout, where we actually identified features and user stories as table stakes, catch up, differentiate things, and hygiene factors. So you can see that we did 2 things. One, we identified these things as separate types of work that we had to do as product managers and product management. We also actually defined it as a separate board. So we separated out the product management board from the dev board, simply to give it enough of presence in the overall mind share of the entire stakeholder team and the overall team. So we sort of drill down into that in terms of the different types of lanes. We also, besides those 4 categories, we also had different types of models that we were working on, and these were all defined in separate lanes. What we realized was that this actually made it a little too complex for us to handle. So we sort of pivoted from this to a different design in the next version of it, which is our version 4. And here what we did was we started to focus more on the planning of the releases, because we were sort of falling behind on our commitments to customers, etc. So we had to get a little more specific about what we were going to do in the next release and the release after that, etc. So we started to do a little bit of Scrum Barnish approach to this. And this is sort of our version 4 for about 2 or 3 years, with, of course, refinement that happened in that time. And then finally, at this point, we have a board that kind of reflects our process a little better. And so this is today our roadmap planning board. So it has taken us nearly 10 years, or maybe 8 or 9 years, to really continue to evolve our process, where we now have a well-defined structure for our roadmap in the way that we think about it, from, as you can see here, themes to epics to user stories, which are systematically sort of broken down one from top to the bottom. And then we track the completion of both themes and epics based on the completion of the user stories. So not only did we sort of elaborate the process that we have for these epics, as you can see here, they go through a functional stage, they then go through a UX impact or a UX design stage, where we do prototypes, we run wireframes, we have meetings with our internal stakeholders to make sure that we are along the right track. And if there are feedback that we get, we take those for rework and rework those, and then we get back to completing this work. And then only they go through a splitting phase where the epics are broken down into user stories, and the user stories then get into the release buckets that we define here. And as you can see here, we do roughly 2 releases per month. So like I said, we are Scrum Barnish, but we don't have separate release and sprint objects. We just do releases, and we do releases twice a month. And as you can tell from here, that we have the next release as well as 3 releases after that are planned ahead of time, in as much sort of certainty as possible, but with the understanding that these could still change before a release actually gets taken up. So just to kind of elaborate on that a little bit better. So this is the roadmap board that we have, where we have these 3 sort of swim lanes for the themes, epics, and user stories. And then we have a separate dev board that visualizes our entire dev and deployment pipeline. And this is the production say we are fully SaaS, and but although we provide on-prem options as well. What we do is that all roadmap work comes from the roadmap board, but any field reported defects, customer reported issues, etc., as well as any internal defects, they directly get logged here, and they get typically higher priority depending on the severity of the issue, while these would take a backseat depending on the kind of work that is sitting in the backlog here. So that's been sort of a journey where we started with a very dev-centric view to implementing Kanban, and then realized very quickly that we had to have do a better job of sort of visualizing our roadmap function, the requirements function, in a way that helped our stakeholders understand what was happening, what was coming, what was being planned, as well as our product managers to really work on things at a level of detail that helped them then sort of manage effectively with the delivery team once the items were taken up for work. So that is the first part. That Kanban really helped us make the product management process more explicit. It helped us evaluate, sort of visualize it much better. And over a period of, I think, 5 or 6 years of working on a common board, we finally then decided to separate out the product management board, or the road mapping board, as we call it, into a separate board where the product management team had control, and they were able to then manage it more effectively in order to feed the dev team with the right sort of right set of features depending on the overall prioritization. I'm going to quickly pause here to see if there are any questions. Otherwise, I'll continue.
I haven't really seen any questions in the chat. It's more like statements.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, go ahead.
Sure.
This is Eric in Melbourne, Australia. How did you work out how to deal with the customer priorities for your backlog? for your product management? You know, if you had like 10 customers wanting different priorities, how did you push back to the customers and say, well, sorry, this is what we've decided to follow?
So although I don't have that visual here, actually, and maybe I can, at the end of the session, I can show you the actual board. We actually have two different buckets here. One is our roadmap stories and one is the customer stories. Now, in terms of prioritizing those customer stories that are going to be taken up in the product, that process is actually handled outside of this board. So unfortunately, I don't have a picture of that here. We have a Kanban board that we use for some of our key customers, where their input is taken in, and that is managed by our support team. And the identification of which ones are sort of common and multiple customers are asking for, those get identified by the support team. So that's actually managed initially by the support guys, and then they feed to the product management the ones that are actually bubbling up to the top based on multiple customers asking for it, the kind of prioritization they get for it, etc. So that's sort of the way that we handle it. Unfortunately, I don't have a full picture here, but I will show you a picture of our full roadmap board that shows you that we identify separately which is the work that's been given to us by our customers, which are the kind of features that have come to us through our customers, and which are the ones that have come through our product management work itself.
Yeah, no, great answer. So that you basically give that as a task to the support team, gives them something to do for the planning as well.
Yes. We actually, they are very, everybody in our company is fairly vocal, and especially the sales and support guys, because if the customers are not happy, they are very unhappy. So they are very vocal in terms of the demands that they have. And of course, ultimately, it is the product management that has the responsibility to make the right decisions about the roadmap. And so we are collaborative, but we are also very noisy in the way that we have those discussions about it. But yes, the support team manages that process, and as far as possible, we go by their votes. There are obviously, and I may be oversimplifying it, there are obviously always conflicts between what sales might want or what support might want or what product management might want. But ultimately, it gets resolved through our daily, our replenishment meetings, which we do twice a month. I actually haven't covered that in this presentation, but we do replenishment meetings twice a month, where all of these people participate. So sales, support, marketing, and product management, and of course engineering. And we define what are the next set of things that we're going to do, and those are the ones that go into this last bucket that you see here, the ready for development next set of things. And then they get taken up most of the time.
That might actually answer my question, because I was wondering, you said that after a while you split up the like the upstream Kanban board from the dev Kanban board downstream, and I would have wondered if there was a trade-off in terms of visibility for the dev team of the upcoming work. But it was that kind of done by the replenishment and having everybody in a room for the upcoming things to go in that last column?
Yeah. So there are two aspects. One is, of course, the replenishment process that certainly brings these into focus. But of course, the boards are accessible to everybody. So the dev team, anybody who's curious, especially the dev leads who are planning the capacity and the people, and who are looking at what can be taken up in the next release, they all have access to the roadmap board as well. They don't usually create new stuff. They might comment on things, etc. But they have all access that they need in order to know what's coming up next. So they can take that as a proactive input to their planning process.
And how do you prioritize the real stories towards, or towards the defects you had in the dev board?
Yes. So like I showed here, I think it's the next slide. So this is the place on the this is the ready for development column. And this is where all defects get logged. Those coming in from internal validation processes, as well as those coming in from the support process. They automatically fill up this column. And so if there is enough space or enough capacity, then we may push in next set of releases, next set of user stories from the column here. it's very likely, and in fact, it happens all the time, that we will have more user stories here than the ready for dev column can take in the next board. So it just is a matter of continuous shuffling of these stories here to make sure that not only is this column filled up to whatever it needs to be for feeding the dev board, but if in the meantime some priorities change and something that was in an N+2 or N+3 release became more important, then those would move up here, and some of these things will go back out here. So we may even within this board, we may do some shuffling, and of course between this and the dev board, we may do some shuffling based on the priorities that are facing us at the replenishment time period.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, the other thing that we do, of course, is that in our daily stand-ups, the engineering managers have sort of greater flexibility to prioritize. There are two types of things that we do. One is defects, of course, customer reported as well as our own. We also have something called engineering tasks, which is, I think, not a very great name for it, but those include things like tech debt and performance related issues or stack upgrade type of stuff. There is a higher level planning that goes on, but every sort of few releases, they have the flexibility to push in things that are related to that category of items, tech debt type of items. So they have some flexibility here in terms of deciding what items to pull into the next release work that we start doing.
Do you work with classes of service on that interface?
No, unfortunately, we don't. We should. We have never really implemented it internally. Most of our customers, of course, do it. And typically, the class of service that they implement is either standard or expedited. Those are the two classes of service that we've seen most of the time. Some of our larger customers have defined their own custom classes of service. So they may have something called a silver bullet or some such name like that. And also maybe a fixed delivery date. But we unfortunately internally have not done that. So we kind of go with priority, and urgency is dictated through these meetings that we have, which are sort of almost on an ongoing basis.
Okay. Eddie just had the same question. No, in terms of classes of service, yeah.
Do you deal with testability stories at all?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Do you ever deal with testability stories? Things that make the application easier to test while it's going through the development process. So, for example, creating data or putting a security login structure together, that sort of stuff. Would that be seen as dev, or that would ripple up to the product?
It is handled by the dev, and what we do actually is, and maybe I should give you a quick look at our board. So if you don't mind, I'm going to jump to. Can you see my screens too?
Yes, we see you at the moment.
Oh, you don't see the browser?
No, we see a lovely lamp.
Oh, okay. Sorry, just give me 1 second.
Yeah.
I thought I'd shared my desktop.
You might have just turned it off.
Okay, let me do this again.
That's it.
Okay, do you see the board?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So as you can see here, so we do I think what is sort of internally referred to as test-driven development. I'm not sure whether we sort of do full justice to it, but as part of our user story or our dev process, you can see that we do both unit test automation and functional test automation through this cycle, right? So by the time we reach the code review phase, all of the test automation has been built in, and the stories have been tested based on that. And that's when we then get into code reviews phases. So we do write test cases, and those are, let me see if I can find you some here. Let me see if I can. So you can see here that we have test cases that we write and run. And for some reason, for now, I'm not showing any. But we do write test cases as part of writing the developer, building the code, and they get run and tested as part of the dev stage of the workflow overall. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does. You're doing a wonderful job, and you're answering all my difficult questions. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, sure. All right, great. So I know that I'm sort of running awfully behind, so I'm going to go back to my presentation and talk about a few other things that I think are useful. Let's go to the next one, which is the fact that, of course, Kanban makes policies explicit. So, of course, again, if you are all familiar with Kanban, then you know that for a fact. Some of the things that I believe have found, that we found really useful are the ones that I mentioned here. So firstly, of course, the whole notion of a commitment point or commit point. Till we started to work with Kanban, I think the whole notion of the fact that just because somebody has logged something into the backlog or into a request, notepad or a stream of things that are being asked for by customers or whoever, that they assume that it is already committed as well, was sort of a given. And it was really Kanban that helped us really understand that, hey, there is a separation between recording or logging something and actually committing to do it, that everything else is options till then. And only when they are actually committed through an actual agreement, then it becomes real for everybody. And from then on, it sort of gets measured. So this was one of the biggest things that happened to us. And I think it should be true for any company that's doing any type of customer driven work where there is certainly a sort of overburdening problem, that they take up, they get measured on things that they've actually taken up, that they've actually committed to. So commitment point was a huge deal for us. WIP limits, besides of course a basic sort of implementation of WIP limits to encourage flow, I think it becomes and I maybe talk about that as part of the slides coming up next. Class of service, and of course some of the other policies that are there. But essentially, these are agreement between stakeholders, as you know, and therefore they help in terms of the collaboration that needs to happen between these various functions. So one of the key things I talked about the fact that sales can get pretty aggressive and digital about pushing through things, and I think in any organization where which is sort of young and early in its life cycle. This question has now become routine for us to ask, and it becomes a very effective way to push back on things that may not really be as important, because they have already asked for a bunch of things. If you ask them, are you willing to deprioritize something that they've already asked for, it very quickly kills that discussion, and then say, okay, we understand, and we're going to come back and go back and talk to the customer or whatever be the source of that request, and sort of re-prioritize their own view of how they want to take up these things. Another thing is, of course, typical customer or leadership driven challenges. Of course, this is urgent, let's do it now. The question about how many urgent items can we handle at a time makes for a very easy decision to say, okay, I'm going to visualize class of service as a great example of that, to have a separate lane for expedited classes of service and have a WIP limit on that as an overall lane, and be able to sort of control that sort of a approach to making decisions. So I'm going to kind of go through this. This is something that, of course, upstream Kanban talks about, and Kanban does a beautiful job of helping you understand the distinction between things that can be discarded because they were really never very important, and how to minimize things that should be aborted after they've been taken up for development. So the right side of the line is, of course, dev, the left side is product management. And you want to minimize the abort, you want to maximize discard, because that's the nature of products and applications that are majority of the features that get requested never get used. They ultimately get deprioritized. And therefore you want to try and manage that process as much upstream as possible. And therefore, as a result, maximize throughput of your dev teams, because that's really the capacity that you have, the sort of rare capacity that you have that you want to utilize effectively. The WIP limit is a powerful signal. I personally, when I was handling product management, I no longer do that. I used to love to play this card that I would say, hey, we are already a little bit over the WIP limit. What do you want me to do? And I would then ask people to say, okay, tell me what do you want to get out of this card that you can push in something new, because that's become more urgent now. So as a visual signal to know that you've already exceeded or met your WIP limit is a powerful signal to, again, have the discussion about whether something is really important or not. The class of service, of course, we already kind of discussed that. The ability to define these different classes of service and be able to use them for prioritization based on the cost of delay is a very, very valuable tool, I think, that Kanban provides. I think it is not, I don't believe, and maybe your experience might be different, I don't believe it is practiced so well yet. It is treated sort of as a proxy to prioritization, which is sort of without taking into account cost of delay. But as organizations become more mature and they understand the notion of cost of delay, they become better at assigning classes of service to the different types of work that they do. And the better they become at it, the better they're able to manage their overall work and be able to explain to the different stakeholders as to why all of those different types of work are important in their own place and how they need to sort of balance between all of them. All right. So very quickly, Kanban enables data-driven discussion. So we kind of talked about this a little bit, but I'll talk about one particular chart in which is a favorite of ours, especially mine, which is the lead time histogram. So the lead time histogram is a great way to know what's the overall distribution of different lead times that you have for the different types of work that you've done or the different work that you've completed. So this gives you a great way to sort of get a picture of what is the overall time that it has taken for completing most of your work, right? And based on that, you can define different levels of confidence or different levels of probability to how long will it take for you to take up something that comes along new. So it happens to us at Epic or user story level. Even this is our version of the histogram where as you can tell, we have with 95% confidence, we can say that any new item that comes along will take up to 65 days. If somebody wants a more aggressive timeline, we can go ahead and tell them that, hey, we can commit to 38 days or 30 days or 40 days, whatever be the number, but it's got to be at a lower level of confidence. And given that we are both looking at the same picture, it becomes easy for them to understand why that is so. So it just makes it very easy to have the discussion and be able to set realistic expectations for what you might be able to do. We have, of course, the enterprise services planning, which is a completely advanced sort of body of knowledge that the Kanban University came up with, and we work with them quite a bit on that. And of course, if you are already working with things like that, you might have used other tools, not necessarily ours. There is the work done by Focus Objective, blanking out of the name of the founder right now. But there are multiple such models that are available whereby you can use cost of delay as a function to decide how much can you delay starting something without incurring any cost of delay. So here you can see, just as an example, the probability distribution of the work that we might expect of a new release that we're planning here. It's 10 user stories, 5 defects, 7 customer reported defects. Based on the data that you have here, which is your past performance data, and I'm using here data from July to February, last 8 months of data. Based on that, you can plot a probability distribution of how long it might take to do this work, and then apply a cost function to it, saying that it's going to cost me $100,000 if I delayed beyond July. In June, I might have a little bit of cost, and if I do it earlier, I may have no cost. Based on this, it then marries these two and then gives you a cost of delay, and what is the latest time by which you need to start in order to minimize your cost of delay. And perhaps an advanced topic for some of you, maybe, or maybe all of you have a general idea about this. Certainly an advanced topic for most of our customers. So most customers today still are still at the basic levels of using their Kanban metrics. But even what I showed you earlier, as well as some of the metrics that I'm going to show you next, they help you answer all of the questions that are on this slide. How much can we deliver per release, per month, per quarter? How long will something take? How soon should we start something? Why is our lead time so long? What stages of our workflow are dragging us down? Things like that. These are all things that a Kanban board and standard analysis of that board really helps you facilitate that, and therefore answer some of these questions very, very easily. And these are some of the metrics that you might use, such as cycle time or cumulative flow diagram or flow efficiency, etc. Sorry, was there a question? Yes, Silka.
Myself. I'm assuming that's all from the Swift Kanban tool. And just my question, can people get all of these numbers and diagrams out of the box when they order Swift Kanban?
Yes, so whatever I've shown you so far, except this one. So the ESP or the enterprise services is an add-on tool that you've got to buy separately. But all of the other ones that I've been showing you, including the lead time histogram, those are all part of the standard functionality. Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Actually, Mahesh, can you just go back a bit?
Sure.
Actually, I think the top right, the top two in the right, in terms of the number of cards blocked and time lost due to blocking and different causes, is really valuable to a lot of, I think, product managers or even delivery managers. And not a lot of tools actually are very good at doing that. And I think that's one thing that I find that's really very useful.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dan, for pointing it out. Actually, the question that I had here about what is holding this up, or what is causing the delay, right? That's a great set of tools that we have here. This is called blocker analysis or blocker clustering, as you might have heard the name. We were thinking of doing it almost around the same time that Klaus first came up with the term, and then we worked with him to Klaus Leopold, for those of you who may not have heard the name. Very well-known Kanban consultant in Europe. And so we kind of captured this information here. So what we provide is the frequency with which different types of root causes might be occurring. So number of cards that are blocked for these different reason codes. And so every time you block a card, you can capture a root cause or a reason code that you are causing. And most common ones are the ones that you'd expect, right? Task switching is one of the biggest reasons why somebody's working on something, they get asked to put that on hold and go work on something else. External resource dependency or external dependency, that's the second big one. People going on vacation, that's unfortunately that's the one for us, the big one. People kind of put things on hold and go off on 2 days, and so that becomes a third one. So what we do is provide that frequency here, and we also then provide how much time is being lost to these different blocking reasons, and that's sort of a proxy to the cost of these delays that you see. So yeah, so thanks for pointing that out, Dan. I know I'm sort of 5-7 minutes from the end time. I'm going to just quickly run through these just to kind of give you a sense of what do we mean by this. So one of the big things that, of course, happens is how do we understand what our capacity is? What can we do month to month or release to release, etc. And of course, having done this for the last 7, 8, 9 years, we now have some fairly good ideas about our own capabilities and our own skills and so forth. So as you can see here, this is a throughput chart that I'm showing you here, which is actually a screenshot. So unfortunately, it's not a current picture, but it shows you what is the kind of work that we've been able to deliver every month, and what is the breakup of that work. So we get to see both the nature of the demand on us. It is not just user stories; we're also doing defects or issues or engineering tasks, etc., that I talked about earlier. So very often people forget that you can't just be sort of planning for the roadmap work. You got to do a lot of other things in order to keep your product competitive and up to date and so forth. So this gives you a great picture of the nature of the demand and the sort of level of the quantum of the demand that or capacity that we have. This is the kind of discussion that I have with a lot of our customers and helping them plan for how they want to do their capacity planning. So looking at this, you can get a sense of what is the general capacity that we have. We might have a few outliers in terms of the kind of work that you might have done in a particular release. And then based on that, thirdly, of course, depending on how you have planned your boards, your team might be doing multiple types of things. And that's, again, something to kind of keep in mind, that you might be supporting multiple customers, you might be supporting multiple products, and so forth. So therefore, all of that has got to be kept in picture in order to understand your overall capacity. And based on that, then you can do your capacity planning. So this is, so to the question that I think Eric had asked earlier, so you can see here, this is a sort of a fuller picture of our roadmap board. And as you can see here, we have a bucket for holding our customer requested items. Below that, we have a roadmap. And as you can see here, even in the next release, for every release, we keep a set of things that are always there from the roadmap as well as from the customer. And obviously, we don't take all of these. We take them based on different types of priority that we might have at a particular point in time. But we have placeholders in the board for customer requested stuff. And then based on that, of course, we do the capacity planning. And there is some advanced stuff that one can do, again, based on the enterprise services planning body of knowledge, where you can do risk profiling or opportunity profiling of what kind of projects or initiatives or epics you're considering. And based on that, you can rate teams of portfolio managers or teams of stakeholders can rate these items on terms of their overall technology, overall risk profile or their opportunity profile, and then use this as the basis to select the next set of work. So you can use all of this data in conjunction with your Kanban board and your intake flow, so to speak, to decide which are the ones that you're going to take as part of your next set of things that you'll do. And then, of course, based on that, you can do a lot of demand analysis, depending on the kind of tooling that you do. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because it's sort of more tool specific. The last thing I want to just focus on quickly is that Kanban, again, helps you focus on the big picture. And the reason is simple. It is because it's applicable at any level. You can start off at the top, at the portfolio level, and then go down to the product or the team level. Or you can start from the bottom and then go upwards and abstract things. So just an example of something that one of our largest customers in South America does is apply this to what they call their OKR method of managing their strategy to execution. So they have a top level board where they manage their OKRs, define their OKR objectives and key results. Those then give rise to programs that they run. So these are programs that are managed in a separate lane, and those then give way to epics and stories that get done by teams which are called tribes at their level. So irrespective of which direction you're going, whether you start from the bottom and then go upwards, or you start from the top and go downwards, what it does is really, I'm sorry, go back to the previous slide, is that it really gives you the that's the heading here, the how, what, and why. So to the senior leadership, it gives you a complete picture of how are we executing to these OKRs or objectives or priorities that we define. So they can look at this and drill down from here all the way down to the lowest level of work. On the other hand, to the lowest level team members, they are clear as to why they're doing certain things. What is the reason that, as I think the KMM poster says, why do we exist? What is the reason why we're doing certain work? And it gives them more meaning to the work that they do. And as a result, everybody sort of in the organization gets a really complete picture of what is the work being done. And that makes it so much more easy for product managers to really keep everybody together in terms of the overall product journey. So, I've got a bunch of these benefit slides and so some of the challenges. I'm going to focus on the challenges towards, and I'm sorry, my lamp just went off. I'm going to mute myself for a second. Sorry about that, in case you're looking at the camera. So I wanted to show you the previous slide, actually, which is this, that in spite of all this amazing stuff that Kanban enables us to do, we still face some of the challenges. And one of them is typically the large amount of work that we need to do in terms of our own roadmap and in terms of our own customers' requests. How do you still manage the demand versus capacity equation? Is still a challenge for us. We still have a huge amount of backlog that is sitting there, and we periodically discard stuff. But I know that in the process, we make certain customers dissatisfied, certain stakeholders dissatisfied because they didn't get what they wanted. It's not an easy challenge to say how can we get that level of capacity. Similarly, deadlines. There was a time when we didn't do these 2 releases per month kind of a schedule. We used to simply say that once we had enough work completed, we would make a release. But what we realized internally was that it didn't put enough pressure on ourselves to complete work as we would do otherwise. So we kind of moved to that Scrum-ish way where we said we are going to releases every 2 weeks or twice a month. And I think that pushed up our challenge. It pushed our teams to work harder or smarter or whatever. But we are able to push up our overall throughput and velocity higher because of that, without really changing any of the dynamics of the teams and so forth. So again, I'm going to leave it here. And I know that I'm out of time, so I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions that I can answer for you.
Just a quick little fact for you. They've done studies already to show that working to deadlines increases people's adrenaline levels, and they actually do get higher productivity. So if they ever try and take your releases away, just throw that at them.
All right. I'd be happy if you could share that the link to that study. I'd love to read that.
Does it lead to burnout, though, eventually? Is it sustainable to always be pushing people to a deadline? if it's against their capacity limits.
Yeah, sensible deadlines with, you know, a little bit of stretch that sits at the top of the load.
And I think that's what it is. So as you said, sensible or predictable. I mean, they know exactly what the deadlines are. They're not suddenly getting pushed with a deadline or suddenly getting a bunch of work without their input on the deadline. So everybody is already clear that this is the plan and that we are going to do this every 2 weeks. And then they know that, yes, there is a large backlog. So they're encouraged to pull work that they can. We still try and implement pull as much as possible, although we sort of have to work with people to ensure that that really happens. But I would agree with that the sensible deadlines is the way to go.
So everybody, we are going over time a little bit now because we had some questions beforehand, and there are still some in the chat, or one at least at the moment. And I think we'll try to answer them if that's fine with you, Mahesh. Otherwise,
sure, absolutely.
Whoever doesn't want to stay on board, it's being recorded, so don't feel obliged to stay. Rod had a question. How do you reflect BAU work on the top-down models, e.g. regularly update website with new content, might be a card at the OKR level or one down?
It's Rod here. I can expand on that question.
Yeah,
yeah, if you could please. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I'm thinking of using it for like a board strategy, as in you know, a board of directors. They've got a strategy that the C-suite are implementing and then working their way down there. And it's something we're doing within our company. And, you know, there are some just ongoing tasks like regularly updating websites or expanding sales networks or whatever. How do you reflect those in the systems?
So there are two ways that we can do it. And I think within our system as well, multiple teams, or rather different teams do it differently. So sometimes you may simply have what you might refer to as orphan cards, which are at the lowest level only, don't have any reflection at the top. And everybody understands that this business as usual work being done that doesn't necessarily get reflected at the OKR level. There are others who prefer to have sort of a placeholder OKR card, let's say, or a card at that level, which is called a business as usual program or project or OKR, depending on your terminology. And then everything gets linked to that. So you can, you know, as you identify new work, which gets identified at the lowest level, then you explicitly just link those cards to the higher level cards to just facilitate the tracking. And people who are sort of more particular about, you know, checking how people are utilized and, you know, whether you know, some, like I said, there is still sort of mix of old versus new management philosophy. So there's some organizations that are quite focused on utilization and so forth. They like to do that. They like to be able to get that view from the top to make sure that every piece of work that's been done at the lowest level is tied to something at the higher level so that they can then drill down to an overall work being done by individuals or teams. So like I said, you can either leave it orphan and not connected to anything, or you could have a placeholder set of cards at the top.
Yeah, for us, it's about managing capacity. So, you know, we need to allocate a certain amount of capacity to that BAU work, and we need it visible in some way. Correct.
So then I would assume that having that placeholder card where you track all of this work would be the way to go.
Cool, thank you.
Cool, thanks, Mahesh. Are there any more questions?
I know it's Friday evening for all of you, so
it is
keeping you from your beer and wine. But,
yeah, still thirsty on your end. Well, awesome. If there are no more questions, thanks a lot, everybody, for joining in on the product manager side of things today. In the next 2 months, we will have David J. Anderson School of Management over here in New Zealand and Australia. Anna is going to talk about the Kanban maturity model and the fit for purpose framework. So also not the doing area, but something else in the Kanban space that we are really excited about. Feel free to join in again. We are excited to have her here in person. And thanks, Mahesh. Thanks so much. I'm stoked to finally have you had here. It was a long, long email
Long
contact
journey.
until we figured it all out. And you're welcome back anytime. You actually have that. We are really keen on that marketing case study if it happens at any time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I'd love to. I will certainly keep an eye on your meetups, Zilka, and if possible, I'll participate. And certainly be happy to connect with any of you who'd like to, and would love to stay connected with you on going forward.
We will. Cool. And everybody else who wants to connect with Mahesh, feel free to. He's on LinkedIn. And yeah, cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
And have a very nice Thursday evening. I was confused with
Yes.
the day. It's Thursday.
It
Right.
is Thursday night here, so yeah.
Enjoy your evenings, everybody.
Hey,
Thank you.
Are you going to stop recording
Take care,
Ship
everybody.
there?
Yes, I will stop recording now.
Are
Thank
you,
you.
or are you